The rain poured mercilessly that night as Lena, frail and shivering, stood barefoot outside the tall glass doors of her children's mansion. Her voice trembled, her hands clutching the torn edges of her coat as she pleaded, "Please, just let me sleep in the garage tonight. I am still your mother." But her daughter's eyes, cold and burning with shame, turned away. Her son's jaw tightened, his voice slicing through the night. "We told you, don't come here again. You'll ruin everything we've worked for." The doors slammed in her face. The reflection of their wealth shone on the glass, but all she saw was her own tears streaming down. The woman who once sacrificed everything for them was left alone in the storm, while two hearts she gave life to chose pride over love. Before we dive into this heartbreaking story, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss powerful stories like this. The day started like every other one for a woman named Lena. She was a tall, slender woman, with skin the color of rich, dark coffee that had seen too many hard years under the harsh sun. Her face was a roadmap of sorrow, with deep lines etched around her eyes and mouth, telling a story of a life that had run her ragged. A few strands of grey hair peeked out from the edges of the faded scarf she wore, a scarf that had once been a bright, hopeful blue but was now just a dull, tired grey, much like the rest of her life. She was always dressed in the same oversized, threadbare coat, which hung on her like a heavy cloak of misery, and a pair of worn-out sneakers that had holes in the toes. She sat on a cold, concrete bench in a small, forgotten park in downtown Atlanta, Georgia. The air was thick with the rumble of city buses and the distant wail of sirens, a symphony of chaos that had become the soundtrack to her life. In her hands, she clutched a small, crumpled photograph, its edges soft from being touched and folded 1,000 times. The picture was faded, but you could still make out the image of a much younger, smiling Lena, with a plump, round face full of hope. On either side of her stood two little kids, a boy and a girl, with wide, excited eyes and the kind of bright smiles that could melt an iceberg. They were twins, dressed in matching blue outfits, and their faces were a mix of their mother's dark skin and a lighter shade inherited from their father. It was a picture of a happy family, frozen in a time when love was the only thing that mattered. As Lena stared at the photo, her eyes filled with tears that she quickly brushed away with a trembling hand. A fresh wave of sadness washed over her, a familiar and heavy feeling that had been her only constant companion for years. She whispered to the faces in the photo, a soft, heartbreaking sound swallowed by the city noise. "My beautiful babies, my sweet Daniel and my little angel, Leah." She thought about how those two beautiful children in the photo had grown up into two successful, respected adults who lived in a world she could no longer even imagine. A world of polished floors, expensive cars, and people who smiled with their teeth but not their eyes. Her Daniel was now a high-powered architect, and his buildings scraped the sky in cities all over the world. He was a man who spoke with a deep, confident voice and wore suits that probably cost more than Lena made in a year. His sister, Leah, was an art gallery curator, surrounded by paintings that cost a fortune. She was a woman of elegance and style, with a perfect bob haircut and a laugh that sounded like delicate wind chimes. They lived a life of luxury, a life that was as shiny and clean as a new coin. They lived in a world where money bought them happiness, or at least the appearance of it. They didn't have to worry about where their next meal would come from or where they would sleep at night. They didn't have to fight to stay warm when the nights got cold or walk miles just to get a bottle of water. They didn't have to feel the crushing weight of loneliness that sat on Lena's chest every single day. The same Lena, their mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything for them, was now living on the streets, invisible and forgotten. One day, a kind woman walked by Lena and saw the sadness in her eyes. The woman, who had a gentle face and a warm smile, stopped and sat down beside her. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft and full of genuine concern. Lena looked up, startled, as if she had forgotten other people existed. "I'm fine, thank you," she said, her voice a little hoarse from disuse. The woman noticed the photograph in Lena's hands. "Are those your children?" she asked gently. A sad smile touched Lena's lips. "Yes," she said, her voice filled with a quiet pride. "My twins, Daniel and Leah. They were my whole world." The kind woman smiled back. "They're beautiful," she said. "You must be so proud." "More than words can say," Lena answered, a small flicker of warmth in her eyes. "They are successful now. They have everything I always wanted for them." The woman's smile faltered a little. "Well, if you don't mind me asking, why are you here? Don't they help you?" Lena's face fell, and her eyes clouded over once again. She looked down at the crumpled photo, her fingers tracing the outlines of her children's faces. They don't know where I am," she lied, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. She couldn't bring herself to tell this kind stranger the painful truth, that they knew exactly where she was, and they didn't care. That they had built their perfect lives on the very foundation of her sacrifices, and when she was no longer useful to them, they simply left her behind. The truth was a bitter pill to swallow. She had raised them with so much love, working 2, sometimes 3 jobs just to keep a roof over their heads and food in their mouths. She remembered the night she went to bed with her stomach rumbling just so they could have a full meal. She remembered patching their torn clothes with her own tired hands and walking miles in the cold to save money on bus fare just to buy them new books for school. She had poured every ounce of her soul into raising them to be good, kind people. She had believed that one day, their success would be her reward, that she would get to see them happy and know that her struggles had meant something. But it all felt so empty now. A hollow victory. She had given them wings to fly, and they had flown so high that they couldn't see the woman who was still on the ground. What made it even more painful was the secret that she didn't know. A secret that, if she had only known, could have changed everything for her and her children. A secret that would have given her a comfortable life and provided her with more than enough to help her children. But the secret was locked away, forgotten in some dusty file cabinet in a lawyer's office, a secret worth millions of dollars. Money that belonged to her, a massive fortune that was her birthright, a legacy from a side of her family she had never known. An inheritance of a staggering $250 million. But she had no idea. Not a single clue. And because she didn't, she sat there, on a hard bench, with a torn photo, a broken heart, and a life full of despair. Life was a carefully constructed performance for Daniel and Leah. It had been ever since they left their old life behind, a life of struggle and shame that they had worked so hard to erase. They now lived in a world of manicured lawns and polished marble floors, a world that was as far away from the cramped, tiny apartment of their childhood as the moon was from the earth. Their home, a sprawling, modern masterpiece of glass and steel in the exclusive hills of Hollywood, California, was a testament to their success. It wasn't just a house, it was a fortress built to keep their past from ever getting in. Daniel, now a celebrated architect, had a face that was all sharp angles and confident smiles. He was tall, with a lean, athletic build, and his hair, a neatly trimmed black halo, was always perfectly in place. He had his mother's dark brown skin, but it was now a shade of sleek sophistication, and his eyes, a piercing shade of hazel, seemed to size up a room in a single glance. He was always dressed in designer suits, fabrics so smooth they looked like liquid. He carried himself with the quiet authority of a man who knew he belonged in any room he entered, a man who had left a trail of blueprints and successful projects all over the world. His twin sister, Leah, was a vision of sculpted elegance. She had a heart-shaped face with high cheekbones and a perfectly straight nose. Her skin was a beautiful caramel color, and her dark, wavy hair was always styled just so, framing her face in a way that made her look like she had stepped off the cover of a magazine. Her clothes were a carefully chosen collection of high fashion, and she moved with the graceful confidence of a woman who was in complete control of her world. She was the owner of a trendy art gallery in the heart of the city, a place where people with more money than sense would pay thousands of dollars for a canvas with a few paint splatters. She spoke in a smooth, cultured voice, her words carefully chosen to fit in with the elite circle she now moved in. Together, they were the ultimate power duo. They were admired, envied, and constantly featured in glossy magazines and online articles. People looked at them and saw two self-made billionaires, a true American success story. They saw the dazzling cars, Daniel's sleek black luxury sedan and Leah's sporty white coupe, and the expensive jewelry. They saw the charity galas, the exclusive parties, and the vacations to places with turquoise waters and white sand. What they didn't see was the constant, low-level anxiety that buzzed beneath the surface. The fear that one wrong move, one small slip-up, would bring their entire world crashing down. They had built their new lives on a foundation of lies, a careful backstory crafted to hide the painful truth of their past. When people asked about their childhood, they would offer a vague, polished answer. They'd talk about attending a good school, a father who was a successful businessman, and a mother who had passed away years ago, leaving them with an inheritance that allowed them to pursue their dreams. It was a story that was just believable enough to be true and just vague enough to be impossible to check. They had a pact: they never talked about the past, not to each other, and especially not to anyone else. It was their unspoken rule, their code of silence. But the past had a funny way of lingering, like a bad smell you just couldn't get rid of. It was always there, a little ghost in the back of their minds, especially on nights when they were alone. They'd find themselves remembering little things: the smell of their mother's cooking, the sound of her voice singing a lullaby, the way she would pat their heads and tell them she loved them more than anything in the world. These memories were like little cracks in the perfect facade they had built, and they had to work hard to fill them in and pretend they never existed. One evening, they were at a fundraising gala for a children's hospital. The room was a shimmering sea of designer gowns and tuxedos. The air smelled of expensive perfume and champagne, and the sound of laughter and conversation filled the space. Daniel was talking to a prominent real estate developer about a new project, and Leah was chatting with a well-known art critic, her smile fixed and bright. They looked like they belonged, two flawless figures in a perfect world. But appearances can be deceiving. The truth was, every time a new person was introduced, a tiny alarm bell would go off in their heads. They'd run through their fabricated backstory again, just to make sure they hadn't forgotten any details. They'd listen to the way people talked, hoping to hear that nobody had found a thread to pull that would unravel their entire story. Leah had just finished a witty comment about a painting on display when she heard a low, gossipy whisper from a small group of women standing nearby. The women, with their perfectly coiffed hair and diamonds that sparkled in the light, were looking at her and Daniel. "Oh, aren't they just divine?" one woman said, taking a sip of her champagne. "Absolutely. And such an inspiring story, isn't it?" another one replied. "Coming from nothing and building an empire. You almost never see that anymore." Leah's heart pounded a little faster. This was the part she hated the most. The part where people got close to the truth, even by accident. Then the third woman, a new face on the social scene, leaned in and lowered her voice even more. "You know, I heard a rumor about them," she said, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of sharing a secret. Leah's smile felt like it was freezing on her face. Her mind raced. What could it be? What had this woman heard? Was it a detail they had forgotten to cover? Had someone from their past found them? A cold dread began to creep up her spine. "What is it?" the second woman asked, clearly intrigued. "I overheard my husband talking. He said his dad, who used to be a business associate of their father, mentioned that their mother worked as a cleaner." Leah's breath hitched. She could feel her entire body go cold. It was like someone had thrown a bucket of ice water on her. The perfect, elegant facade she had built began to crack. She instinctively looked over at Daniel, whose back was to her. He was laughing with the real estate developer, a deep, booming sound that filled the air. She wanted to yell at him to stop, to get them both out of there, before the woman continued with her malicious whispers. The woman continued, "Yeah, not a cleaner in a company, but as a house cleaner, or what they call a maid. My husband said the twins' mother used to clean houses for a living. I heard she even cleaned the very house of their boss's father back in the days." The woman's eyes widened, loving the shock on her friends' faces. "Can you believe it? The famous Daniel and Leah, with a maid for a mother? It's just too crazy to be true, right?" Leah's stomach churned. The phrase "maid for a mother" echoed in her head, a cruel, mocking chant. She could feel the shame rising, hot and suffocating, threatening to overwhelm her. She wanted to run, to hide, to pretend she hadn't heard anything. But she couldn't. She was trapped, standing in the middle of a room full of people who knew her name and her story, a story that was slowly being picked apart, piece by piece. She saw Daniel turn around, his eyes scanning the crowd for her. Their gazes met, and in his eyes, she saw the same terror she felt in her own heart. He had heard. The words had reached him, too, cutting through the music and the laughter and the polite conversation. They both knew that this was it. The very thing they had spent their entire lives running from had finally found them. They stood there, frozen, their perfect world teetering on the edge of a cliff, about to fall apart. The whispered rumor from the gala didn't just stay in the air, it traveled like a brushfire, spreading from one social circle to another. In their polished world, where reputation was everything, gossip was a weapon. And the story of Daniel and Leah supposed made for a mother was a juicy one, too good for their so-called friends to ignore. In the days that followed, Daniel noticed the change first. At business luncheons, the usual easy conversation about market trends and new projects would suddenly get quiet when he walked up. He'd catch people exchanging quick glances, a flicker of a smile or a raised eyebrow. The questions he was asked were no longer about his architectural designs but about his unconventional rise to the top. People would ask, with a feigned curiosity, if his past experiences influenced his work, their tone loaded with double meaning. It was subtle, but it was there, like a tiny crack in a perfect vase. He felt the trust and respect he had worked so hard to build begin to waver. Leah was dealing with the same thing in the art world. Potential clients, people she had been negotiating with for months, would suddenly become unreachable. The art critic she had been chatting with at the gala now wrote an article that hinted at the hollow and uninspired nature of her gallery's collection, a thinly veiled attack on her legitimacy. She'd walk into a room, and conversations would stop. She would overhear snippets of laughter and hushed words, the sound of her name floating on the air like a taunt. People who once praised her style now openly questioned her taste. They saw a woman who came from nothing, a woman who didn't deserve to be in their exclusive club. The constant pressure was a silent, suffocating weight. It followed them everywhere, like a shadow they couldn't outrun. They would meet for coffee, their perfect composure gone, replaced by a nervous energy they couldn't hide. "I can't believe this is happening," Leah said one afternoon, her voice a low, frustrated whisper as she stirred her expensive coffee. "Everywhere I go, I feel like people are looking at me, judging me. They're waiting for me to fail." Daniel ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, his face tight with stress. "I know. My project with the city council is on the rocks. The lead council member's wife is a huge gossip. I heard her telling her friends that my designs lack a certain pedigree. She said it was because of my humble beginnings." "Can you believe that?" he asked, the word humble laced with venom. They both knew what they were really talking about. It wasn't about their beginnings, it was about their mother. The woman they had abandoned, the woman whose existence was now a threat to the carefully constructed lives they had built. They had thought their silence, their careful lies, had been enough. But the truth, in the form of a forgotten rumor, had found its way out, and it was threatening to destroy everything. The gossip got worse when a blog post went viral in their small, elite community. Someone had done a little digging and discovered that a woman named Lena, a maid, had once been employed by the father of the developer Daniel was now working with. The old man, who was known for his kindness, had mentioned a hard-working maid who had twins. He had even tried to help her a few times, but she was a proud woman who always refused a handout. The post didn't name them directly, but the connection was clear. It was a digital breadcrumb trail leading right back to their deepest, darkest secret. The maids for a mother rumors intensified and went viral. The shame was a physical sensation. It was a hot, burning feeling that crept up their necks and settled in their chests. They had worked so hard to escape that life, to be seen as more than just the children of a house cleaner. They had poured their hearts and souls into their careers, not just for money but for respect, for a place in the world where they wouldn't have to feel that kind of shame ever again. Now, it was all being threatened, not by something they had done, but by something they were born into. Leah looked at her brother, her eyes pleading. "We have to do something, Daniel. This can't keep happening." We can't let her ruin us. Daniel's jaw was clenched. He knew what she meant. They had to put more distance between themselves and their mother. They had to make it clear, once and for all, that they had nothing to do with her or the life she represented. They had to cut her off completely, so the whispers would eventually die down. They justified their actions as a matter of survival. It was their careers, their lives, against her. In their minds, it was a simple choice. They had to protect what they had built, even if it meant turning their backs on the person who had given them everything. They convinced themselves that they were not being cruel, but practical. A few days later, Lena was walking through a different neighborhood, a more affluent one than she was used to. She had a strange feeling, a pull in her heart that she couldn't explain. She found herself walking past a row of high-end offices and sleek art galleries. She wasn't looking for anything, just wandering, when she saw him. It was Daniel. He was standing outside a glass building, talking on his phone, his expensive suit fitting him like a second skin. He looked so important, so successful. She wanted to run to him, to grab him, and to tell him how proud she was. A warm smile spread across her face, the first genuine smile she had had in a long time. Her heart ached with love and longing. Just then, his eyes, scanning the street, landed on her. For a moment, her smile widened, a flash of pure, unconditional love shining in her eyes. But then, she saw his face change. The warmth in his eyes froze, replaced by a look of pure terror and disbelief. His hand holding the phone dropped slowly, and his body went rigid. He looked at her, then back at the building, his eyes darting around as if looking for an escape route. He saw some of his co-workers coming out of the building. He quickly turned his back on her, pretending he hadn't seen her, and walked in the opposite direction, his pace quickening with every step. Lena's smile faltered, her heart sinking with a familiar, painful thud. Her joy turned into a deep ache, a realization that he had seen her, but he didn't want to. He was ashamed. He was embarrassed by her. They justified their actions as a matter of survival. It was their careers, their lives, against her. In their minds, it was a simple choice. They had to protect what they had built, even if it meant turning their backs on the person who had given them everything. They convinced themselves that they were not being cruel, but practical. A few days later, Lena was walking through a different neighborhood, a more affluent one than she was used to. She had a strange feeling, a pull in her heart that she couldn't explain. She found herself walking past a row of high-end offices and sleek art galleries. She wasn't looking for anything, just wandering, when she saw him. It was Daniel. He was standing outside a glass building, talking on his phone, his expensive suit fitting him like a second skin. He looked so important, so successful. She wanted to run to him, to grab him, and to tell him how proud she was. A warm smile spread across her face, the first genuine smile she had had in a long time. Her heart ached with love and longing. Just then, his eyes, scanning the street, landed on her. For a moment, her smile widened, a flash of pure, unconditional love shining in her eyes. But then, she saw his face change. The warmth in his eyes froze, replaced by a look of pure terror and disbelief. His hand holding the phone dropped slowly, and his body went rigid. He looked at her, then back at the building, his eyes darting around as if looking for an escape route. He saw some of his co-workers coming out of the building. He quickly turned his back on her, pretending he hadn't seen her, and walked in the opposite direction, his pace quickening with every step. Lena's smile faltered, her heart sinking with a familiar, painful thud. Her joy turned into a deep ache, a realization that he had seen her, but he didn't want to. He was ashamed. He was embarrassed by her. As she stood there, her smile completely gone, she saw a car pull up in front of the art gallery across the street. A tall, elegant woman stepped out. It was Leah. She was on her phone, laughing at something the person on the other end was saying. She looked so beautiful, so happy. Lena's eyes filled with tears, but she couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride. She watched her daughter for a moment, the woman she had dreamed of her becoming. But then, Leah ended her call and looked up. Her eyes fell on her mother, and her laugh died in her throat. Her face, a mask of perfect composure just moments before, twisted into a look of panic and disgust. She didn't run, not like Daniel. Instead, she turned to a man standing nearby and said something to him. The man, a security guard, walked over to Lena. He said, his voice cold and firm. "You can't loiter here. Please move along." Leah watched from a safe distance, her eyes hard and unyielding, as her own mother was being told to leave. Lena stood there, a homeless, broken woman, with a heart that was once full of love for her children, now shattered into a million pieces. The beautiful dreams she had for them had come true, but in their success, she had lost them forever. How could the love a mother gives be seen as a burden by the children she gives it to? This was a question that would haunt Lena every day. A question that she had no answer to. Their perfect, shiny lives were built on a foundation of lies. But it wasn't just the lie they told the world, it was a lie they had been telling themselves for years, a story so ingrained in their minds it had become the truth. It was a story that started long ago, on a cold, rainy day in a small apartment in a different city. Lena was a young mother back then, with a tired but hopeful look in her eyes. Her twins, Daniel and Leah, were only 7 years old, full of a boundless energy that seemed to bounce off the walls. Their father, a man named Michael, was a tall, handsome man with a charming smile and a quick temper. He was a struggling artist who had a hard time keeping a steady job. He was always filled with big plans and grand promises, but none of them ever seemed to come true. On that rainy afternoon, the air in the small apartment was heavy with the silence of an argument. Daniel and Leah were in their room, building a fort out of pillows and blankets, their young ears straining to hear the hushed, angry words coming from the living room. They heard their father's voice, raised in a frustrated tone, followed by their mother's soft, pleading one. They heard the sound of a suitcase being zipped and the front door opening. Then, they heard their mother's voice, a broken sob that cut through the silence. "Please, Michael, don't do this. Don't leave your children." But the door slammed shut. He was gone. The twins ran out of their room, their faces etched with confusion and fear. Their mother was standing by the door, her shoulders shaking, tears streaming down her face. "Mama, where did Papa go?" Daniel asked, his little voice trembling. Lena knelt down and pulled them into a tight hug. She didn't know what to say. The truth was too painful, too complicated for their young minds to understand. She couldn't tell them that their father had left because he was tired of being poor, tired of the struggle, and tired of the responsibilities of a family. He had gone to chase a dream, a promise of a life that didn't include them. So, she did what she thought was best at the moment. She lied. "Papa had to go away for a while," she said, her voice choked with emotion. He just needed to find his own way. But he'll come back for you one day. He loves you very much." She didn't mention the argument, the angry words, or the accusations he had thrown at her. She didn't tell them he had blamed her for everything, for his lack of success, for the poverty they lived in. She took the blame for everything, hoping to protect their image of their father. She wanted them to believe that he was still a good person, a man who loved them and would one day return to their lives. She never said a bad word about him, not one. But the twins, with their young, impressionable minds, had heard only part of the story. They had heard their father's raised voice and their mother's sad, pleading one. They had seen his anger, and they had seen his back as he walked out the door for good. And in the way that kids do, they filled in the blanks. They concluded that it was their mother who had pushed him away. That she was the reason their family was broken. Their little minds had created a new truth, one that was easier to process. It wasn't that their father was selfish, it was that their mother was difficult. It was her fault. This belief became the foundation of a quiet, deep-seated resentment that grew stronger with every passing year. They watched their mother work multiple jobs, her body getting more and more tired, the lines on her face deepening. They saw her sacrifices, but they didn't see love. They saw a woman who couldn't keep a good man, a woman who had somehow failed them. The years passed, and their anger hardened into a cold, resentful stone in their hearts. When they eventually became successful, their success wasn't just about money, it was about proving their father had been wrong to leave. But it was also about proving that they could do better than their mother, that they could build a better life for themselves, one without the shame and pain she had brought into their lives. Years later, sitting in his fancy office overlooking the city, Daniel stared out the window, his mind going back to that day. The memory of his father's angry face and his mother's tear-streaked one was as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. The recent gossip about his mother had brought all the old, painful memories back to the surface. He felt a familiar rage boil up inside him, the same rage he had felt as a 7-year-old boy. He remembered a conversation he had with his father's best friend, a man who had visited them a few times when they were little. The man had told him, "Your mother is a strong woman, son. You'll understand one day." He had no idea what that meant then, and he still didn't understand it now. He just knew that his mother had made him and his sister suffer for so long. She had been the cause of their broken home and the reason they had to struggle so hard. Leah was in her gallery, surrounded by a world of beauty and quiet sophistication, but her heart was filled with a bitter, ugly feeling. She couldn't shake the shame she felt at the gala when she heard what people were saying about her mother. She had worked so hard to create a new identity, and her mother was a living, breathing testament to the person she had been, the life she had escaped. That night, they met at Daniel's home, a sprawling testament to their success. They sat in his living room, the city lights twinkling in the distance, a silent, tense energy between them. "I can't believe this is happening," Leah said, her voice filled with a mix of anger and despair. "She just won't leave us alone. She shows up out of nowhere, at our places of work, just to embarrass us." Daniel took a long sip of his expensive whiskey. "She's always been this way, hasn't she? Always bringing us down." "Yeah," Leah muttered, her voice low and filled with resentment. "Ever since Papa left. She's the one who made him go." Daniel put his glass down, the sound echoing in the silent room. "You know, all this shame, all this fear of being exposed, it all started with her. She's the reason we had to struggle so hard. She's the reason we've had to lie about our past." Leah nodded, a wave of agreement washing over her. She stood up and walked to the large window, staring at her reflection in the glass. The beautiful, successful woman staring back at her was a complete stranger from the little girl who had once watched her father leave. She leaned her head against the cool glass, the anger and resentment bubbling up inside her. Her voice was barely a whisper, filled with a raw, painful bitterness. "If she's really our mother, she's the reason we suffered." It was a bright, bustling Tuesday in downtown Los Angeles. The sun was shining, and the streets were filled with people in a hurry. For Lena, it was just another day of trying to survive. She was walking past a row of fancy office buildings, her head down, her mind a million miles away, when she saw a familiar face in the crowd. It was Daniel. He was standing with a group of people, all dressed in sharp suits, laughing and shaking hands. He looked so happy, so successful, so full of life. He was a beacon of light in her dark, lonely world. She hadn't seen him up close since the last time he walked away from her, but she couldn't forget the sight of him. A wave of love and longing washed over her, pushing aside the fear and the shame. She had to talk to him, just for a moment. She had to hear his voice. She quickened her pace, her worn-out sneakers slapping against the clean pavement. Her heart was pounding in her chest like a drum, a mix of hope and terror. What would he say? Would he be angry? Or would he, just for a second, remember the little boy who used to cling to her hand? She got closer, her voice trembling as she called out to him. "Danny boy! My little Danny boy!" The sound of his childhood nickname, a name only she used, hung in the air. Daniel, who had been laughing, froze. The sound of her voice, so full of love and a pain he had tried so hard to forget, cut through the noise of the city. He turned around slowly, his face a mask of disbelief and dread. His eyes, his beautiful, hazel eyes, landed on his mother. He saw her ragged coat, the messy scarf, the lines of sorrow on her face. And he saw the love in her eyes, a love that he had spent years pretending didn't exist. The conversation around him died down. His co-workers, a group of high-powered architects and engineers, looked at him, then at the older, disheveled woman standing a few feet away. They were all waiting to see what would happen. Daniel's mind was racing. His entire professional life, his reputation, everything he had worked for, was on the line. He couldn't let her expose him, not here, not in front of everyone. He had to make a choice, and in a split second, he made a cold, heartless one. He took a step back, his face a mask of confusion. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cold and distant. "Do I know you?" Lena's smile faltered. The hope in her eyes began to fade, replaced by a deep, heartbreaking sadness. "Danny boy, it's me. It's Mama," she said, her voice a little louder, a little more desperate. "What are you talking about?" He shook his head, a look of annoyance on his face, as if he was dealing with a crazy person. "I think you have the wrong person. My name is Daniel Thompson, and I don't know who you are." He turned to his co-workers, offering a forced, apologetic smile. "My apologies, gentlemen. It seems this woman has mistaken me for someone else. I have a meeting to get to." He began to walk away, his back straight, his shoulders squared, pretending not to hear the woman who was calling his name. His co-worker stood there, frozen, watching the scene unfold. Lena just stood there, her hands trembling, her heart shattering into a million pieces. The humiliation was a physical pain, a sharp, stabbing ache in her chest. The son she had given everything for was now denying her existence, treating her like a stranger, like a piece of trash on the street. She felt the tears well up in her eyes, hot and stinging. She turned and walked away, her shoulders slumped in defeat. The street, which had been so bright just moments ago, now seemed grey and blurry. She didn't look back. She couldn't bear to see the pity in the eyes of the people who had witnessed her humiliation. As she disappeared around the corner, one of Daniel's co-workers, a kind-faced woman named Sarah, turned to him. Daniel was already moving to change the subject, his voice loud and cheerful, trying to pretend nothing had happened. But Sarah, who had a mother of her own, couldn't just let it go. She looked at him with a mix of confusion and concern, the question hanging in the air between them, a silent accusation. "Daniel, wait," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "That woman. I just need to be clear. Was she your mother? She was calling you her son." Daniel froze again, his cheerful facade cracking. He looked at her, then at the rest of the group, and a cold dread crept up his spine. The question was asked. Now he had to face the consequences. Daniel was waiting for Leah at his mansion that night. The house, usually a quiet sanctuary, felt cold and empty. He had sent his staff home early, not wanting anyone else to witness the raw, ugly conversation he knew was coming. He was holding a glass of whiskey, but he hadn't taken a sip. He was too agitated, his mind replaying the scene with Sarah at his office. The look on her face, a mix of pity and disgust, was something he knew he would never be able to forget. Leah walked in, her face pale and drawn. She threw her keys on the marble counter with a loud clatter and sank onto the plush sofa, her body language a clear picture of exhaustion and defeat. "You heard, didn't you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The gossip has spread everywhere. My gallery is a ghost town. All my major clients have either cancelled or postponed their deals indefinitely. They're all talking about it. They're all laughing at us." Daniel nodded, the anger in him finally bubbling over. "Of course, I heard. Do you know what Sarah said? She was so disgusted. She looked at me like I was a piece of garbage. All because of her. Our mother." Leah sighed, a tired, weary sound. "I know. It's like she has a talent for showing up at the worst possible time. Just when we think we've finally made it, she appears and drags us back down into the mud. We've worked so hard for this, Daniel. We can't let her destroy it." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their fear filling the room. The silence was broken by Daniel's voice, low and filled with a cold, calculated fury. "We need to put an end to this. We can't let her do this to us." She's a bottomless pit, Leah. She'll never stop. Right now it's just a few whispers, but what happens when she starts showing up at our homes? Our private lives. Leah shuddered at the thought. She'll ask for money. She'll want a new house, a new car. She'll tell us how much she suffered. And we'll have to give it to her, just to get her to be quiet. But that won't be enough. It never is. They had seen it before, or at least they had convinced themselves they had. They imagined a scenario where their mother's requests would start small, then grow bigger and bigger. They pictured her bringing along other poor relatives they didn't even know existed, all of them with their hands out, asking for a piece of their success. They saw their carefully crafted lives turning into a charity case, a circus of pity and obligation. Their fear and greed were so powerful, they convinced themselves that their mother's love was nothing more than a trap, a way to exploit them and drain them dry. We have to make it clear, Daniel said, his voice hard. She can't be a part of our lives anymore. Not now. Not ever. We have to cut her off completely. No more phone calls, no more texts, no more seeing her. We have to let her know, once and for all, that she is not a part of our lives anymore. Leah didn't hesitate. She was scared. Scared of losing everything she had worked so hard for. Scared of the humiliation, the judgment, the whispers. And in her fear, she agreed. You're right. It's the only way. For us. We have to protect ourselves. It's us or her. They justified their cruelty by calling it self-preservation. They convinced themselves that they were the victims, that their mother's existence was a threat to their happiness. They had already been living a life of secrecy and lies. This was just another layer, a final, necessary step to ensure their perfect lives would never be touched by the messiness and shame of their past. They made a solemn promise to each other. They would never speak to her, never see her, never acknowledge her again. They had no idea that Lena, in her desperation to see them, had decided to make a last-ditch effort. She had saved up a few dollars, just enough for a bus ticket, and had traveled to the affluent neighborhood where she knew they lived. She didn't have a plan, only a heart full of hope and a desperate need to talk to her children, to tell them how much she loved them, and to try and fix the heartbreaking distance between them. She knew she had to try, one more time, no matter what it took. The next morning, as the sun began to rise over the Hollywood Hills, a small, tired-looking figure stood at the grand, imposing gates of Daniel's mansion. The gates were a towering wall of wrought iron and polished brass, a symbol of the wealth and power on the other side. Lena, clutching her old, worn-out purse, rang the bell. The sound echoed in the quiet morning air. A guard's voice came through the speaker, cold and impersonal. "State your business." I'm Lena," she said, her voice shaking a little. "I'm their mother. Please, I just need to see my children." Inside the house, Daniel and Leah, who had just come downstairs, heard the conversation. They looked at each other, their faces a mix of anger and disgust. Their plan had to begin now. "Tell her to go away," Daniel said into the speaker, his voice a low, cold command. "Tell her if she doesn't, we will call the police." The guard repeated the message, his voice flat and emotionless. "You need to leave. The owners of this property do not know you. They have asked me to tell you that if you don't leave, they will call the police." Lena stood there, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her own children were threatening to call the police on her. The shame, the pain, the humiliation, it all came crashing down on her. She had come here with so much hope, and now, it was all gone. She just stood there for a moment, tears streaming down her face, her body trembling with the weight of her grief. She had nowhere else to go. Her last hope had just been ripped away from her. The grand, imposing gates were a fortress, and on the other side of them, her own children had just locked her out for good. The morning air was still cool, and the golden light of the sun was just beginning to touch the tops of the palm trees. But for Lena, the world was a cold and grey place. The guard's words, a death sentence for her last shred of hope, still echoed in her ears. He had his orders, and he was a man who followed them. As she stood there, a lone, broken figure at the gates, she watched as the man's face hardened. He was no longer just a voice, he was a wall, a barrier she couldn't break through. "I'm sorry, I have to ask you to leave." "Now," he repeated, his voice firm, his hand reaching for the radio on his belt. The threat in his voice was clear. He wasn't just going to ask nicely again. Lena's heart was pounding. She knew she was pushing her luck, but she couldn't give up. Not yet. She took a step closer to the gate, her hands trembling as she grabbed the cold iron bars. "Please," she begged, her voice a raw, desperate whisper. "Please, just let me see them. Just for a minute. I just want to tell them. I love them." Inside the house, Daniel and Leah stood by a large window, watching the scene unfold. They could hear their mother's voice, a thin, pleading sound that was carried on the wind. They saw her clinging to the gates, her face a mask of sorrow and desperation. For a brief moment, a flicker of something, was it pity? Was it a memory, touched their faces? But it was gone as quickly as it came. They had made a pact, a solemn promise to themselves, and they weren't going to break it now. "She's making a scene," Leah said, her voice tight with anger. "She's going to draw attention. People are going to see." Daniel nodded, his jaw clenched. "Just tell the guard to get rid of her. I don't care how. Just do it now." The guard, seeing that the woman was not leaving, walked out of the gate, his steps heavy and purposeful. He was a big man, and he seemed to dwarf Lena as he approached her. She let go of the bars, her hands falling to her sides in defeat. "You're trespassing on private property. The owners have asked me to remove you. If you don't leave, I will be forced to call the police," he said, his voice flat and without emotion. He then gently but firmly took her by the arm and began to guide her away from the gate. Lena stumbled back, her eyes fixed on the house, on the windows where she knew her children were watching. She had to try one last time. "Please, Daniel, Leah," she cried out, her voice breaking. "Please just look at me." But there was no response. The windows of the house were like cold, dark eyes, and the faces of her children were nowhere to be seen. They had turned away from her, just as they had turned away from their past. They were inside their fortress of wealth, safe and secure, while she was being thrown out on the street. The guard led her to the end of the property line, pointing down the street. "Go. And don't come back," he said, his voice a final, crushing blow. As Lena walked away, her shoulders slumped in defeat, she didn't see the man who was watching the whole scene unfold from his car across the street. He was a neighbor, a man named Robert, and he was on his way to work when he saw the commotion. He had heard the rumors about the new owners of the mansion, about their strange, detached personalities. But he had never imagined it would be this bad. He watched as the small, frail woman was escorted off the property by the guard. He saw the way she looked back, her face a mask of such deep sadness that it was a physical punch to the gut. He saw the guard's callous behavior, a clear sign that he was just following orders. And he saw the way the house remained silent and unyielding, a monument to a heartless act. He took out his phone and started to record the scene. He didn't know these people. He didn't know their story. But he knew an injustice when he saw one. He started to film as the guard pointed down the street, and the woman walked away, her back to the world, a picture of pure heartbreak. He lowered the phone, a frown on his face, and muttered to himself. So this is how they treat their own mother. He had no idea what he was going to do with the video, but he knew he couldn't just stand by and do nothing. He had a feeling that this was only the beginning. That the story of this family was far from over. The gala was a glittering spectacle, a dizzying whirlwind of lights, music, and wealth. It was a charity event held in a huge, glamorous hall in Beverly Hills, and the city's elite had all come out in their finest clothes, their smiles as bright as the diamonds on their necks. For Daniel and Leah, this was their world. They were at the center of it, mingling with celebrities and business tycoons, their polished exteriors hiding the coldness they felt inside. They looked perfect, a picture of success and grace. But Lena had heard about the gala. She had seen the posters in the bus stops, all with pictures of her children's faces, promoting the big event. She knew she couldn't get in. She was a homeless woman, dressed in rags. But the pull was too strong. She had to try, one more time, to get a glimpse of her children. To see them happy, even from a distance. She found a way to sneak in through a side entrance, hiding behind a catering truck and blending in with the other delivery people. She didn't know where she was going, she just kept walking, her heart pounding in her chest like a drum. The smell of expensive perfume and food filled the air, a stark contrast to the smells she was used to. She felt like an alien in a foreign land. She found a corner behind a large curtain, a little dark space where she could hide. From there, she could see everything. She could see her children. Daniel was on a stage, giving a speech about the importance of giving back to the community. He was confident and commanding, his voice filling the hall. Leah was standing by his side, her face radiant with pride. They looked like movie stars, so far away from the two kids she had raised with her tired hands and a heart full of love. A quiet, heartbreaking smile spread across Lena's face. They were so beautiful, so successful. She just wanted to be close to them, to witness their triumphs, even if they didn't know she was there. But as fate would have it, a waiter carrying a tray of drinks stumbled, and a glass of red wine spilled all over the front of Leah's expensive white gown. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Leah's perfect composure cracked, and she let out a cry of frustration. The waiter, a young man with a terrified expression, was on his knees, trying to clean the stain, apologizing profusely. Lena, seeing her daughter in distress, couldn't stop herself. The mother in her took over. She rushed out from behind the curtain, a cry of concern on her lips. "Leah, honey, are you okay?" "What happened?" she asked, her voice full of worry. Everyone turned to look at her. The whispers started instantly. They saw a disheveled, ragged woman rushing towards the twins. They saw the way her eyes, full of love and worry, were fixed on her daughter. The music stopped. The whole room fell silent. Leah, her face already pale from the wine stain, went a sickening shade of white. She looked at her mother, then at the hundreds of eyes fixed on her. She saw a well-known society reporter, a woman she had been trying to impress for months, standing right in front of her. Her mind raced. The public humiliation was a hot, burning feeling in her chest. She had to stop this. She had to stop her mother from ruining everything, right there, in front of everyone. "Who are you?" Leah said, her voice shaking with rage and fear. "What are you doing here?" "Guards! Get this mad beggar out of here!" Lena stopped in her tracks, her hand reaching out for her daughter, frozen in midair. The word beggar hung in the air, a cruel, mocking insult. Her heart, already so fragile, broke into a million pieces. Daniel, seeing the scene unfold, rushed to his sister's side. He put an arm around her, his face a mask of outrage. "Don't touch my sister. We don't know this woman. She's clearly mentally unstable," he said to the crowd, his voice loud and clear, full of a cold disdain. "She must have snuck in from the street. Please, someone call security." Lena's eyes were filled with tears, her lips trembling. She looked at her son, the boy she had raised, the man she had sacrificed everything for. "Daniel, what are you doing?" "It's Mama," she whispered, a plea in her voice. "Please, stop." But Daniel didn't even look at her. He looked at the crowd, at the cameras flashing, and he saw his reputation, his legacy, his entire life, at risk. He would rather pretend she didn't exist than let her ruin him. He looked at his mother one last time, a look of pure hatred and disgust on his face, before he turned his back on her and walked away. The guards, who had been watching from a distance, rushed forward and grabbed Lena by the arms. They pulled her away, out of the hall, out of the light, into the darkness of the night. She was crying, her heart and her spirit crushed. She was humiliated, right there, in front of everyone. As the guards dragged her away, the well-known reporter, a woman named Vanessa, stood at the back of the room, her phone in her hand. She had been a witness to the whole scene. She had heard the woman, in her ragged clothes, call the twins her children. She had seen the way they had reacted, the coldness in their eyes, the disgust in their voices. She had a gut feeling that this was not just a story, it was a scandal. It was a juicy piece of news that would sell like hotcakes. She smiled to herself, a cold, calculating look in her eyes as she quickly typed on her phone. Twins humiliate their own mother in front of the world, she muttered to herself, a devilish grin spreading across her face. This will make headlines if I publish it. The city never slept, and neither did the pain in Lena's heart. She was a ghost in the concrete jungle, invisible to the hurried crowd, a shadow in a world of blinding lights. The cold, damp air of the underpass was her only blanket, and the distant rumble of the subway was her only lullaby. She was alone. All she had was a crumpled photo, a broken spirit, and the endless, painful replay of her memories. She sat hunched against a cold concrete pillar, the humiliation from the gala still burning in her chest. The words her children had used, beggars and mentally unstable, echoed in her mind. They were a cruel song, a song she would have to listen to for the rest of her life. She pulled her threadbare coat tighter around her, shivering, but the cold she felt had nothing to do with the night air. It was a cold that had seeped into her bones, a cold that had been there for a long, long time. Her mind drifted back to a time when her world was a different place, a time when she was a mother, not a beggar. She remembered the day her car broke down for the last time. It was a beat-up old thing, but it was all she had. She had to get to her second job on time, and the bus was too expensive. So she sold it. She remembered the man who bought it, his face filled with pity as he handed her the stack of money. It wasn't much, but it was enough to pay for Daniel and Leah's school books, enough to make sure they didn't have to go without. She had walked to work that day, her feet aching, a tired but hopeful smile on her face. Her babies were going to have a good education, and that was all that mattered. She remembered the night she went to bed with her stomach rumbling. The hunger was a familiar feeling back then, a constant companion. She would make a meal for Daniel and Leah, a simple meal of rice and beans, and watch as they ate, their little faces full of contentment. "Mama, aren't you eating?" Daniel would ask, his young eyes filled with concern. "No, baby," she would lie, "I already ate." "You eat all you want. You need to grow big and strong." She would watch them finish their plates, a feeling of deep satisfaction washing over her, even as her own stomach cried out for food. She would rather starve than see them go without. She remembered the countless hours she spent on her feet, cleaning other people's homes. She would scrub floors until her hands were raw and polish furniture until it shined like a new coin. She would look at the beautiful, comfortable homes she was working in and she would dream. She would dream of a day when her children would have a home like this, a life of comfort and security. She would work until she couldn't stand anymore, her body aching with exhaustion, but she would never complain. She was doing it for them. Her love for her children was a fire inside her, a fire that kept her going, even when everything else was gone. Now, as she sat alone in the dark, she wondered how that love had turned into their hatred. Had she done something wrong? Had she loved them too much? Had she not loved them enough? She had poured every ounce of her soul into them, every single sacrifice she made was for them, every tired step she took was for their future. How could the love she had given them become so twisted, so ugly, that they would treat her with such cold disdain? The question was a heavy stone in her heart, a question that she had no answer for. A sharp, painful cough rattled her body, a deep, rasping sound that hurt her chest. She brought her hand to her mouth, trying to muffle the sound, trying to hide the pain. When she pulled her hand away, a dark, crimson stain was on her palm. It was blood. She stared at it for a moment, her eyes wide with fear. She quickly wiped her hand on her coat, hiding the evidence, a desperate attempt to pretend that nothing was wrong. But something was wrong. Something had been wrong for a long time. The endless years of hardship, the constant hunger, the emotional pain had taken a toll on her body. A toll that she couldn't hide anymore. But even with the pain, she just wanted to know, how did her love turn into their hate? It was a quiet evening at a high-end restaurant in Miami, Florida. The kind of place where the music was soft, the lighting was dim, and every whisper felt important. Daniel and Leah were at a table with a small group of their closest friends, a mix of successful people from the worlds of art and architecture. They had all heard the rumors, and the air was thick with unspoken questions. The twins had been avoiding social events and phone calls, but they knew they couldn't hide forever. They had to face the music, and they had decided to confront the rumors head-on, in a way that would put them back in control of the narrative. Leah took a sip of her expensive champagne, her hand shaking a little. She looked at her friends, her eyes pleading for their understanding. "I know you've all heard the stories," she began, her voice low and tight. "You've probably heard about that woman from the other night. The one who crashed the gala." Her friends nodded, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern. "Well," Daniel said, taking over, his voice a low, steady rumble, "we're not going to lie. She is our mother." A collective gasp went around the table. The friends looked at each other, surprised by the admission. They had expected the twins to deny it, to come up with some elaborate lie, but they had admitted it, right there, in front of everyone. "But it's not what you think," Leah quickly added, her voice full of a desperate need to be understood. "We're not cruel. We're just protecting ourselves. She's a good person, but she's a dead weight. We've spent our entire lives trying to escape the kind of life she represents. A life of poverty, of struggle, of shame." The friends listened, their faces a mix of pity and fascination. This was a story they had only heard in hushed tones, but now they were getting the full, unfiltered version. Daniel continued, his voice filled with a painful bitterness. "She's the reason we had to work so hard. We couldn't stand the life we were living. We felt trapped. We needed to get out, to be someone. Every time we think we finally made it, she shows up, in her tattered clothes, with her hand out, reminding us of everything we tried so hard to forget. We're ashamed of her. We're ashamed of the past. And we can't let her ruin the lives we've built." The friends were silent, taking it all in. Most of them had grown up with money, with a safety net they had never had to worry about. They couldn't understand the kind of fear and shame that drove Daniel and Leah. They saw two incredibly successful people who were still haunted by their past, and they felt a flicker of sympathy. But one of the friends, a woman named Chloe, didn't look convinced. She had known the twins since their college days, and she had seen their journey from a different perspective. She had seen how much they loved their mother back then, how they would call her every day. She had seen the way their lives had changed, how the more money they made, the colder and more distant they became. She had always felt like there was a missing piece to their story. She looked at them, her face serious, her voice a soft but firm whisper. "I hear you," she said. "I can't imagine what you went through. But she is still your mother. You can't just throw her away. She raised you. She gave you life." Daniel scoffed, a look of impatience on his face. "She gave us a life of struggle, Chloe. A life of poverty. A life of shame. We had to fix everything she broke." Chloe shook her head slowly. She had seen the way the twins had been treating their mother. She had seen the video a neighbor had taken of the scene at the mansion gates. She had seen the online articles. She had felt a deep sense of wrongness about it all. She leaned forward, her eyes fixed on them. "Listen to me," she said, her voice dropping to a low, serious tone. "I'm not judging you. I'm just telling you to be careful. You can't turn your back on your mother. My grandmother used to say that a mother's cry can bring a curse. Be careful what you say and what you do. Curses come from dishonouring parents." Daniel and Leah exchanged a look. They had heard the old saying before, but they had always dismissed it as a silly superstition. They were educated, successful people. They didn't believe in curses. They believed in hard work, in a life they had built for themselves. They laughed at their friend's warning, a short, bitter sound that was full of a cold, arrogant confidence. They were too smart to believe in such things. They were too successful to be touched by a mother's curse. But as they laughed, a shiver went down Chloe's spine. She had a feeling that this was only the beginning. That the twin story was a cautionary tale, a story that was just about to get a whole lot darker. The days following the gala were a blur of cold, lonely misery for Lena. The humiliation had been a final blow, a crushing weight on her spirit. She had no more tears left to cry. She had nothing left to give. Her body, already weakened by years of hardship, was finally giving up on her. The cough was getting worse, the dark stains on her scarf a constant reminder of the life that was slowly slipping away from her. She found a quiet spot under a bridge, a place where the world couldn't see her anymore. She wasn't begging, she wasn't asking for anything. She was just sitting, her body slumped in defeat, her heart a hollow, empty shell. She had given everything she had to her children, and in return, they had given her nothing but pain and shame. She couldn't understand it, but she knew she had to accept it. She had to let them go. She had to set them free, even if it meant she was truly alone in the world. A new thought came to her mind, a quiet, peaceful idea. She would write a letter. Not a letter of anger or resentment, but a letter of love and forgiveness. She had to let them know that she didn't hate them. That she wasn't angry. That she understood, in a way, why they had done what they did. She had to give them a final gift, a gift of peace, a way for them to live their lives without the burden of her. She found a discarded piece of paper and a broken pen, and she began to write. Her hands were shaky, the words a little messy, but they came from her heart. She wrote about the years of love, the sacrifices she had made, not as a way to guilt them, but as a way to remind them of who she was. The mother who had loved them more than anything. She wrote about the painful memories, the times they had to go without, the hunger, the shame. But she didn't blame them for it. She wrote that she was sorry if she had ever made them feel ashamed. She told them that her only wish had ever been for their happiness, and that if her absence was what it took for them to be happy, then she would do it. She would disappear. She would no longer be a burden to them. She would let them be. And at the end, she wrote a single, heartbreaking line, "I forgive you. I love you both, more than you will ever know." She folded the letter and put it in her small, worn-out purse. She would deliver it to their home, leave it at the gate, and then she would walk away. She would disappear from their lives forever. She had to. It was the only way she could give them a chance at a truly happy life, a life without her. Her body ached, a deep, persistent pain that she could no longer ignore. Her cough was now a constant, brutal rattle in her chest. But she had to deliver the letter. It was her last task, her final act of love. She had to make sure they knew that she had forgiven them. She began to walk, slowly, her body swaying with every step. The walk to their mansion was long and difficult, and she had to stop a few times to catch her breath, a deep, painful gasp that was filled with a rattling sound. She clutched her purse to her chest, a precious cargo that held her last words to her children. The sun was shining, a warm, bright light that was a cruel joke on her cold, tired body. She was just a few blocks away from the mansion, so close to giving them her last gift, when she felt a sharp, stabbing pain in her chest. She stopped, her hands clutching her chest, a gasp of pain escaping her lips. Her legs gave out, and she fell to her knees, her body trembling with the effort of just staying upright. Her vision blurred, the world around her turning into a hazy, indistinct mess. She tried to stand up, to take just one more step, but she couldn't. The world began to spin, and she collapsed in the middle of the street, her body a small, frail heap on the cold, unforgiving pavement. Her hand, still clutching the purse, fell to her side. The letter was so close, just a few feet away from her, a letter filled with a mother's last words of love and forgiveness. But she couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. The world was fading away, and all she could think of was her children. Her beautiful babies. The one she had loved more than her own life. The city lights twinkled below, a beautiful, dazzling tapestry of success and celebration. Inside Daniel's sprawling penthouse, the mood was just as bright. The living room was filled with soft music and the low, contented hum of conversation. Daniel and Leah were toasting each other with flutes of expensive champagne, a quiet, knowing smile on both of their faces. They had just finished a tense phone call with the last of their family, a distant aunt, where they had made it clear that their mother was a burden they were no longer willing to carry. The family had been shocked, but the twins had been firm. This was it. The final, irreversible step. To us, Daniel said, his voice a low, happy rumble as he clinked his glass against Leah's. To finally being free. No more shame. No more embarrassment. We can finally live our lives without fear. Leah's eyes sparkled as she took a long, celebratory sip of champagne. I know. It feels like a weight has been lifted. Remember how nervous we were about going to that gala? And now look at us. The media has already moved on to the next scandal. The gossip has died down. We did it, Daniel. We cut her off, and now we can truly be who we were always meant to be. They laughed, a short, joyful sound that echoed in the vast, quiet room. They talked about their upcoming business deals, their plans for the future. They were finally at peace, a peace that had been purchased with a mother's pain and a final, heartless act of rejection. They had convinced themselves that they were victims, that their mother's life had been a series of mistakes, and that their only mistake was to have been born to her. They had made a new life for themselves, a new family, a new past, and a new future, and they were celebrating their freedom from a past that they thought was a curse. It's a strange feeling, isn't it? Daniel said, his voice quiet as he looked out at the city lights. Not having to worry about what she's going to do next. Not having to look over our shoulders every time we see a homeless person. It's quiet. Peaceful, Leah corrected, a small, genuine smile on her face. It's peaceful. We can finally live our lives without her. Just then, a loud, insistent knock echoed from the front door. It was a firm, purposeful sound that broke the peaceful quiet of the room. The twins looked at each other, a flicker of annoyance on their faces. They weren't expecting anyone. The only people who came to the penthouse were people who had been pre-approved by their security. Leah walked to the door, a scowl on her face. I'll go see who it is. Probably a delivery person or a lost visitor. She opened the door a crack, her body language a clear picture of her impatience. But on the other side of the door was not a delivery person. It was an old man, with a kind face and a calm, dignified air about him. He was dressed in a dark, simple suit, and in his hand, he held a worn-out briefcase. He looked out of place in front of their modern, gleaming door. Good evening, he said, his voice a quiet, warm sound that was so different from the cold, professional voices they were used to. My name is Arthur. I'm a lawyer. I'm looking for a woman named Lena. Leah's heart, which had been so light just moments before, sank to her stomach. She felt a cold dread creep up her spine. The name, the simple, common name, was like a curse in her ears. We don't know anyone named Lena, she said, her voice a little too quick, a little too sharp. You have the wrong address. She tried to close the door, but the man put his hand up, a gesture that was both gentle and firm. Please, don't, he said. I know she is your mother. We've been looking for her. I have some very important news for her. News about a very large inheritance. Leah froze, her hand on the door. Her mind reeled. What was he talking about? An inheritance? Her mother? It couldn't be. It was impossible. She looked over at Daniel, who had a look of confused dread on his face. He had heard. I don't know what you're talking about, Leah said, trying to keep her voice steady, but she could hear the tremor in her words. My mother passed away years ago. The lawyer shook his head, a look of profound sadness on his face. I know about the stories you've told, he said quietly. But the last time I saw her, she was very much alive. A beautiful, kind woman. A woman who, if she had lived just one more day, would have been a very rich woman indeed. Daniel walked to the door, a mix of anger and confusion on his face. Get out, he said, his voice low and threatening. You're trespassing. I'm calling the police. But the old lawyer wasn't intimidated. He just looked at them with a deep, knowing sadness. He didn't move. He just stood there, a quiet, patient figure, holding the truth in his hands, a truth that would change everything. The silence in the hallway was heavy, filled with a weight that was so much more than a simple misunderstanding. It was a silence that carried the crushing weight of a tragedy they were just beginning to understand. The silence in the grand hallway was thick and heavy, broken only by the faint ticking of a grandfather clock in the distance. Daniel and Leah stared at the old lawyer, a mix of disbelief and anger on their faces. They wanted to dismiss him, to laugh him out of their home, but the quiet, serious look in his eyes held them in place. The word inheritance hung in the air, a foreign, impossible word that couldn't possibly be connected to their mother. "You must be mistaken," Daniel said, his voice a low growl. "My mother came from nothing. She was a cleaner." The lawyer, Arthur, just shook his head slowly. He looked at them with a deep, knowing sadness, as if he had seen this kind of disbelief before. "That's the story she told everyone. But it wasn't the truth. Her father, your grandfather, was a very wealthy man. He left his small hometown in Jamaica as a young man with a dream. He made a name for himself in the business world, first in Canada, then in London, where he built a small empire. He passed away peacefully just a few weeks ago in his estate in London. He left a will, and a very large part of his estate was left to his only daughter, Lena." Daniel and Leah looked at each other, their faces pale with shock. They had no idea. Their mother had never once mentioned a family with money, a grandfather who was a successful businessman. The image they had of her, a woman who came from a life of poverty and struggle, was a lie. A lie they had believed, a lie they had built their entire lives on. Arthur continued, his voice soft but firm. He was a very private man. He kept his family and his business separate. He never wanted to give her a handout. He wanted her to prove herself, to stand on her own 2 feet. But he always kept an eye on her. He knew she was married, that she had children. He knew all about you. A chilling thought went through Daniel's mind. His grandfather, a man he had never even met, had been watching their lives. The knowledge was a cold, uncomfortable feeling. He was proud of her, you know, the lawyer said, a small, sad smile on his face. Even though she struggled, she never asked him for a thing. She never told him about her hardships, even when he offered. She always said she was fine. He respected that. So, he had a will written up, leaving her a substantial part of his estate. $250 million, to be exact. The numbers hung in the air, a staggering, impossible amount. $250 million. The sum was so big, it felt unreal. It was more money than they had ever even dreamed of. It was more than they had worked for. It was a fortune that was a part of their family, a part of their bloodline, and they had never known about it. The shame they had felt just moments before, a shame about their mother's poverty, was now replaced by a new, more painful kind of shame. The shame of their own ignorance. The shame of their own judgment. Leah, who had been silent up to this point, finally spoke, her voice a low, shaky whisper. But if she had this money, why was she living on the streets? Why didn't she just claim it? The question was a desperate plea for a different answer, a way for them to make sense of the past. Arthur's eyes filled with a deep, profound sorrow. She never knew about it. The will was written in a way that required her to claim the inheritance personally. She was notified, but she didn't open the letters because they were sent to a P.O. box she had a long time ago. She was always on the move, always struggling, always working. She never got the letters. The money was waiting for her, but she died in poverty, unaware of the fortune that was hers. The words hit them like a physical blow. Their mother, the woman they had called a beggar and dead weight, the woman they had rejected and humiliated, had been a rich woman all along. $250 million had been waiting for her, waiting for the moment she would claim it, a moment that had never come. The thought was a painful, brutal twist of fate. Daniel staggered back, leaning against the wall for support. His mind reeled. They had hated her for being poor, and all the while, she was carrying a treasure they had never known about. They had chased a life of wealth and status, and all along, the greatest fortune they could have ever had was with her, with the woman they had thrown away. The lawyer, seeing the shock on their faces, took a deep breath. He had one more thing to say, a final piece of information that would shatter their world completely. He looked at them with a look of deep pity, as if he knew that what he was about to say would be the most painful truth they would ever hear. "There's one more thing," he said, his voice a quiet rumble that was filled with a chilling finality. "There's a condition, and it changes everything." The words hung in the air, a final, crushing blow. Daniel and Leah stared at the lawyer, their minds reeling from the information. $250 million, a fortune beyond their wildest dreams, had been waiting for their mother. But because she had died in poverty, unaware of the treasure, the money was gone. It had slipped through their fingers like sand, a bitter, painful irony. But what do you mean?" Daniel stammered, his voice a raw, desperate whisper. She's dead. How can the money be gone?" The lawyer, Arthur, sighed, a long, tired sound that was filled with a deep sorrow. "Your grandfather, in his will, was very specific. The inheritance was to be a gift from him to her, to be claimed by her and her alone, in person. It was a test of sorts, a way for him to see if she would finally accept his help. But she never came. And because she didn't, the money was moved to a foundation he created to help young children in need. It was a condition of the will. If the inheritance was not claimed within a certain amount of time, it would be given to charity. It was his wish." Leah staggered back, her hand flying to her mouth, a sharp, bitter gasp escaping her lips. The money was gone. Not because of a mistake, not because of a legal loophole, but because of them. Because they had abandoned their mother. Because they had allowed her to die in poverty, cold and alone, without the knowledge of the fortune that was hers. The realization was a heavy, suffocating weight, a truth that was so much more painful than any rumor or gossip. Daniel, his face a mask of disbelief and rage, clenched his fists. He had spent his entire life running from poverty, from a life of lack and want, only to find out that the greatest fortune he could have ever had was with the very person he had rejected. He had thought that their lives were a result of their own hard work, their own ambition. But it was all a cruel lie. A terrible, ironic joke. Arthur, seeing the pain on their faces, took a small, black notebook from his briefcase. He opened it and stared at a page, a quiet, sad smile on his lips. "She came to see me, you know. Several times. I tried to talk to her, to tell her about her inheritance. I had been instructed by her father to tell her she had a trust fund and an inheritance with a lot of money in it. But she never listened. She would come to my office, always looking tired and a little frail, but with a fierce light in her eyes. I would try to get her to sit down and talk about the money, but she would always refuse. She would just ask me a simple question." The twins, their hearts pounding in their chests, looked at the lawyer, their eyes fixed on his face, a desperate plea for more information. "What did she ask you?" Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible. Arthur's voice was a quiet, sad rumble, a voice that was filled with a deep, heart-wrenching pity. "She never came for the money. She only asked about you. About you too. She only ever asked me if there was a way to make sure that her children would have a good future. She always said that her only wish was for her children's happiness." The words hit them with a force that was more powerful than any physical blow. Their mother, the woman they had called a dead weight, a beggar, had not been a beggar at all. She had been a loving, selfless woman who had a fortune waiting for her, a fortune that she was willing to give up just to make sure her children were happy. She never came for the money. She only asked about them. The truth was a bitter, painful pill to swallow. They had hated her for being poor, and all the while, she was carrying a treasure that was not just money, but a mother's unending love and sacrifice. A love they had thrown away. A treasure they would now never be able to claim. A treasure that, in their blindness and pride, they had killed. The wealth they had pursued so desperately felt empty and cold, a hollow mockery of the real fortune they had lost. The air in the penthouse was thick with a silence that was heavier than any conversation. Daniel and Leah stood before the lawyer, their perfectly composed facade shattered, their world turned upside down. The truth of their mother's selflessness was a painful, bitter pill to swallow. They had believed her to be a burden, a source of shame, but she was a wellspring of a love so deep and so pure that she had been willing to give up a fortune for them. Arthur, the lawyer, opened his briefcase and pulled out a simple, manila folder. He opened it and laid out several pages on the marble counter. They were legal documents, but they were not what caught the twins' attention. He pointed to a small, handwritten note at the bottom of a page. It was a single line, written in their mother's familiar handwriting. It was a note she had written to him a few weeks ago. It was a note about them. "This is the last note she wrote," he said, his voice a soft, gentle rumble. "She was in my office a few weeks ago. I tried, one last time, to get her to come and claim her inheritance. I told her the money was waiting for her. But she just looked at me and said, 'Mr. Arthur, I don't need any money. I just need to know my children are safe and happy.' Are they safe?" The twins stared at the note, their eyes filling with tears. The handwriting was a little shaky, a little messy, but it was unmistakably hers. It was a final, irrefutable proof of her unconditional love. The woman they had called a beggar, a dead weight, a source of shame, had been a mother who loved them more than $250 million. She always refused to talk about the money, Arthur said, his voice a quiet, sad whisper. She only ever asked about you. About how you were doing. About your businesses, your lives. She told me she was so proud of you, so proud of the people you had become. She never knew you had abandoned her. She just thought you were so busy with your lives that you didn't have time for her. She never once complained. She just came to me, again and again, to talk about you." Leah's knees gave out, and she sank onto the sofa, her hands shaking, her body trembling with a mixture of grief and shame. The weight of her mother's love, a love she had so carelessly thrown away, was now a crushing burden. She had convinced herself that her mother was a user, a leech, a person who would have drained them dry. But the truth was so much more painful. Her mother was a selfless, loving woman who had a fortune waiting for her, and she had never once mentioned it. She had only ever mentioned her children. She carried the blame silently, Arthur said, his voice a low, sad rumble. She never wanted you to know about your father's selfishness. She wanted you to have a good image of him. She wanted you to believe he was a good man. She carried the pain and the blame of his leaving all by herself, just to protect your feelings. The twins' eyes filled with tears, hot, painful tears that they could no longer hold back. The truth was a sharp, stabbing pain in their hearts. They had hated the wrong person. They had blamed the wrong person. They had thrown away a love so pure, so deep, so unconditional, that they had lost a fortune that was not just money, but a mother's love. Arthur reached back into his briefcase. "I have one more thing for you," he said, his voice a quiet, sad rumble. "She left this with me. She said she had been carrying it with her for a while, and she was going to deliver it to you personally. She asked me to make sure you got it. She said it was a letter of forgiveness." He handed them a small, crumpled envelope. It was a simple, plain envelope, and inside was a single, handwritten letter. It was the letter she had written for them, a letter filled with her last words, her last act of love, and her final goodbye. Daniel and Leah stared at the letter, their hands trembling, their hearts pounding in their chests. This was it. This was their mother's last gift to them. A gift of forgiveness, a gift of peace, a gift of a love that they had so cruelly thrown away. The letter lay unopened on the counter, a silent accusation, a testament to a love they had rejected. But the old lawyer, Arthur, wasn't done yet. He had one final, gut-wrenching truth to reveal, a truth that would shatter the last pieces of their carefully constructed reality. He looked at the twins, his kind face filled with a deep, profound sadness. "There's one more thing you need to know about your mother," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. "A secret she carried with her, a burden she bore in silence to protect you." Daniel and Leah, their faces streaked with tears, looked at him, their hearts pounding in their chests. They had already been hit with so much truth in the last few minutes. What more could there possibly be? You grew up believing that she drove your father away, didn't you? Arthur asked, his eyes filled with a quiet pity. You thought she was the reason he left. You've carried that anger, that resentment, all these years. But it wasn't the truth. Daniel's mind flashed back to that rainy day, the sound of his father's angry voice, the slam of the front door. The image of his mother's tear-streaked face. All these years, he had believed it was her fault. Her fault that he and his sister had to grow up in poverty, without a father. Your father, Arthur said, his voice a quiet, sad whisper, was a man who chased wealth and a life he thought he deserved. He was tired of being a struggling artist. He was tired of the responsibilities of a family. He left your mother for another woman, a very wealthy woman who could give him the life he always wanted. He didn't just leave you, he abandoned you. He abandoned his family for money and a life of luxury. Leah's hand flew to her mouth, a gasp of pure horror escaping her lips. The man they had defended, the man they had believed was the victim, was the one who had abandoned them. The man they had blamed their mother for driving away, was the man who had chosen money over them. A bitter, ironic truth. He asked her to come with him, Arthur continued, his voice now a low, pained rumble. He told her he was going to start a new life, a life of wealth and luxury. But your mother, she refused. She refused to leave her children. She told him that her place was with her children, not with him. She was a mother, not a gold digger. She stayed. She took the blame. She let you believe it was her fault, so you would never have to know that your father was a selfish, heartless man who chose money over his own children. The words hit them like a physical blow, a final, crushing truth that was so much more painful than any lie. The woman they had hated, the woman they had blamed for all their suffering, was the one who had sacrificed everything for them. She had carried the burden of their father's actions, silently, alone, for years, just to protect their hearts. She had given up a life of wealth to stay and raise them in poverty. And they had hated her for it. They had hated her for protecting them. They had hated the wrong person. The truth was a brutal, undeniable fact that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The shame, the regret, the grief, it all came crashing down on them, a suffocating weight that they would never be able to escape. The rain was a cold, miserable drizzle, a fitting soundtrack to the overwhelming grief that consumed Daniel and Leah. They stood in a small, forgotten cemetery, a world away from their glamorous lives. The ground was wet, and the air was thick with the smell of damp earth and dying leaves. They were searching for a grave, their hearts heavy with a painful, suffocating mix of guilt and regret. It had taken them days to find her final resting place. A kind woman at the homeless shelter had helped them, a woman who had seen Lena's kindness and had been a witness to her lonely passing. They finally found it. A simple, unmarked plot. No headstone, no flowers, nothing. Just a small, lonely patch of grass. It was a stark, brutal testament to the life she had lived, a life they had so cruelly taken from her. They just stood there, staring at the empty space, a silent, powerful accusation. Leah, her face pale and streaked with tears, sank to her knees, her hands digging into the cold, wet soil. She was crying, a deep, guttural sound that was filled with a pain she had never known. "Mama," she whispered, her voice a raw, heartbreaking sound. "Mama, I'm so sorry." Daniel stood over her, his body trembling, the unopened letter clutched in his hand. He had been a successful man, a man who had built a career on strength and power, but now he felt so weak, so broken. The cold, hard ground felt like a mirror, a reflection of the cold, hard hearts they had had. He knelt beside his sister, his hand shaking as he opened the letter. He unfolded the small, crumpled paper, his eyes blurring with tears as he read the words. His mother's handwriting, a little shaky and messy, was a testament to her tired, broken body. But the words were filled with a love so pure, so deep, that it felt like a physical embrace. She forgave them. She forgave them for leaving her, for rejecting her, for humiliating her. She asked for no money, no home, no care. She just asked for their happiness. And at the end, she had written a single, beautiful line, "I love you." I pray that you find your happiness. May God bless you both. The forgiveness was a crushing weight. They had expected her to be angry, to be bitter, to be filled with resentment. But she wasn't. She had died with love in her heart, not hate. She had died with a prayer for their happiness, a prayer that was a beautiful, devastating truth. They had thrown away a love so rare, so pure, that it had been a fortune more valuable than any money. Daniel looked down at the letter in his hands, then at the empty grave. The rain was washing over their faces, mixing with their tears. He felt a deep, profound sense of loss, a loss that was so much more painful than any physical pain. The money, the $250 million, had been a symbol of her love, a gift she had never even known she had. A gift they had killed with their pride and blindness. He crumpled the letter in his hand, his body shaking with a deep, heart-wrenching sob. He looked at the sky, at the grey, unforgiving clouds, and a bitter, painful whisper escaped his lips. We killed our blessing with our own hands. Our love, our family, our fortune, we killed it all. If this story touched your heart, don't leave without subscribing. Drop a comment below and let us know, do you think the twins deserved the inheritance, or did they lose it the moment they turned their backs on their mother? Like and share this story if it moved you.